The scream that tore through the general store wasn't hers, though it should have been. And that's what made Quinlan Garrett stop in his tracks that sweltering August afternoon in 1883. He'd been passing through Pendleton, Oregon, with nothing more on his mind than restocking his saddlebags and moving on to the next ranch job, when he heard the clatter of breaking glass, followed by absolute silence, the kind that makes a man's instincts flare. The door to Morrison's general store stood half open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Quinlan's hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip before he thought better of it, and pushed through the doorway with caution. Inside, a woman stood frozen beside an overturned display of canned goods, her face pale as milk, eyes fixed on the shattered jar at her feet. She couldn't have been more than 23, with dark auburn hair pinned back in a simple style that suggested practicality over vanity. But it wasn't her pretty features that caught Quinlan's attention. It was the way she held herself, rigid as a fence post, and how her right hand clutched at her left sleeve despite the oppressive heat that had every other soul in Pendleton stripped down to the bare minimum the law would allow. "Miss?" Quinlan said quietly, not wanting to startle her. "You hurt?" She jerked her head up, those wide eyes landing on him with a mixture of fear and something else he couldn't quite name. "No, I'm fine. The jar slipped." Her voice was soft, educated, with traces of an Eastern accent. Boston, maybe, or Philadelphia. Quinlan nodded slowly, noting how she positioned herself so the counter stood between them. "Looks like peaches. Shame to waste them. I'll pay for it." She spoke quickly, already reaching for a small coin purse with her right hand, still gripping that left sleeve. "I'm very sorry for the mess." Old Morrison emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a stout man with kind eyes, the sort who'd extended credit to half the families in Umatilla County at one point or another. "Now, Miss Dalton, don't you worry about that. Accidents happen." Dalton. So she had a name. Quinlan filed that information away, studying her more carefully now. She wore a high-necked dress in pale blue calico, long sleeves buttoned tight at the wrists despite the temperature outside, pushing past 90 degrees. Sweat beaded at her temples, but she made no move to roll up those sleeves or loosen that collar. "Let me help you with that," Quinlan offered, moving to crouch down and collect the larger pieces of glass. "No!" The word came out sharp, panicked. Both men looked at her in surprise. She composed herself quickly, smoothing her features into something approaching calm. "I mean, that's very kind, but I wouldn't want you to cut yourself. I'll take care of it." She bent down carefully, keeping her left arm close to her body, and began picking up the glass with her right hand. Quinlan watched her struggle for a moment before Morrison bustled over with a broom and dustpan. "Here now, let me handle this. Miss Dalton, you go on and finish your shopping. Quinn, wasn't it? I've got those supplies you ordered ready in the back." Quinlan straightened. "Quinlan Garrett, yes, sir." "Good man, come on back with me." But Quinlan's attention remained on the woman called Dalton. She'd moved away from the broken glass toward a display of fabrics, and he noticed now the careful, measured way she moved, as if any sudden motion might cause her pain. When she reached for a bolt of cotton, her sleeve rode up just an inch, maybe less, and he caught a glimpse of mottled purple and yellow before she tugged it back down. Bruises. Old ones, healing, which meant there were probably fresh ones hidden beneath that fabric too. His jaw tightened. In his 30 years of life, 20 of them spent working ranches from Texas to Montana, Quinlan had seen plenty of men who thought their fists gave them authority. He'd never cottoned to that kind of cowardice, and he wasn't about to start now. Morrison was talking, listing off the supplies he'd gathered, but Quinlan only half listened. The woman, Miss Dalton, had selected a few items and brought them to the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she counted out coins. "Will that be all?" Morrison asked gently. "Yes, thank you." She gathered her parcels, holding them awkwardly against her chest with her right arm. "Good day." She was past Quinlan and out the door before he could formulate any kind of response. Through the window, he watched her walk down the dusty main street of Pendleton, her gait just slightly uneven, favoring her left side. "Known her long?" Quinlan asked Morrison, trying to sound casual. The shopkeeper's cheerful expression dimmed. "Miss Dalton? She came to town about 4 months back, married to Bernard Ellsworth. He owns the big house on the hill, inherited it from his uncle along with a good piece of land. Came out from Pennsylvania to claim it. She seem happy to you? Morrison's hand stilled on the sack of flour he was tying. That's not really my business, son. Maybe it should be somebody's business. The older man met his eyes then, and Quinlan saw the knowledge there, the concern that had nowhere to go in a town where a man's wife was considered his property, and any interference was met with hostility and social consequences. You planning on staying in Pendleton long? Was thinking of moving on tomorrow. Got a job offer up in Walla Walla. Might be best. Morrison's tone was kind but firm. Some things an outsider can't fix. Quinlan paid for his supplies and loaded them onto his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, but as he swung into the saddle, his eyes drifted up toward the hill Morrison had mentioned, where a large white house stood out against the brown landscape, its fresh paint gleaming in the harsh sunlight. He'd never been good at walking away from trouble. The Yellow Rose Saloon offered cold beer and hot food, both of which Quinlan took advantage of while he listened to the conversations flowing around him. Pendleton was a railroad town, bustling with commerce from the wheat farms and cattle ranches that surrounded it. The clientele in the saloon reflected that, a mix of ranch hands, railroad workers, farmers, and businessmen. Here Ellsworth's got himself a new buggy, someone said from a nearby table. Must be doing well with that land. Doing well enough, another voice responded. Though I heard he's been having words with Jenkins over the water rights to Silver Creek. Ellsworth's the type to have words with everyone. Got a temper on him, that one. Quinlan sipped his beer slowly, absorbing the information. So Bernard Ellsworth was known for his temper. That tracked with what he'd observed. Pretty wife, though, the first speaker continued. Wonder what she saw in him. Family money, probably, or maybe she didn't have much choice. Women alone back east, they need to marry someone. The conversation drifted to other topics, but Quinlan had heard enough. He finished his meal and headed upstairs to the room he had rented, intending to get a good night's sleep before making a decision about his next move. Sleep didn't come easy. He kept seeing those bruises, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd held herself like something broken and badly mended. He'd known women like that before. His own mother had worn long sleeves in summer, once upon a time, before his father had gotten himself killed in a bar fight and freed her from that particular misery. By dawn, Quinlan had made his decision. He'd stay in Pendleton a few more days at least. Maybe he couldn't fix anything, but he could watch, and if an opportunity presented itself to help, well, he wouldn't be the kind of man who turned away. The morning brought cooler air, though by noon it would be roasting again. Quinlan took his time over breakfast at a small restaurant near the hotel, then walked Copper down to the livery stable to check on her boarding. The town was already awake and busy, merchants opening their shops, wagons rolling down the street laden with goods. He spotted her near the church, a modest building with a white steeple at the east end of town. She was arranging flowers on what appeared to be a grave, her movements slow and deliberate. Quinlan tied Copper to a hitching post and approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten her. "Morning, Miss Dalton." She started anyway, nearly dropping the bouquet of wildflowers she held. When she turned, he saw the fresh bruise on her cheekbone, poorly concealed by powder. "Mr. Garrett. You remembered my name? I have a good memory for names." She turned back to the grave, placing the flowers in a small vase. The headstone read, Margaret Ellsworth, beloved sister, 1841-1882. "Family?" Quinlan asked. "My husband's aunt. She raised him after his parents died. He was very close to her." There was something in her voice, a careful neutrality that spoke volumes. "He likes the grave to be well tended. That's kind of you to do it for him." "It's expected." Those two words carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Quinlan shoved his hands in his pockets, searching for the right words. "Look, Miss Dalton, I don't mean to overstep, but if you ever need help with anything at all, I'm staying at the Yellow Rose for a few more days." Her head turned sharply, and he saw panic flash across her face. "I don't need help. I have everything I need. My husband provides very well for me." "I'm sure he does. Just sometimes a person needs a friend is all." "I have friends." "Do you?" The question hung between them, too direct, too pointed. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You should go, Mr. Garrett. If Bernard sees me talking to a strange man, he'll be concerned." "Concerned? That what you call it? Go, please." Her voice dropped to a whisper, urgent and afraid. "You don't understand. You'll only make things worse." Quinlan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that nothing could be worse than what he suspected she was enduring, but he'd pushed enough for one day. He tipped his hat. "As you say, madam, but that offer stands. Any time?" He walked away, feeling her eyes on his back until he turned the corner. His hands had curled into fists, anger simmering low in his gut. This was exactly the kind of situation that made him hate the way the world worked, where laws protected a man's right to do as he pleased within his own home, even if what pleased him was violence. The next 2 days passed in a frustrating pattern. Quinlan saw her around town, always alone, always wearing those long sleeves and high collars despite the heat. She acknowledged him with a polite nod when their paths crossed, but made no attempt at conversation. He learned more about Bernard Ellsworth from casual questions and observation. The man was in his mid-30s, successful enough, but with a reputation for being quick to anger and slow to forgive. He drank heavily at the saloon most evenings, playing cards and making loud proclamations about everything from politics to the proper way to train a horse. Quinlan made a point of being at the saloon those evenings, watching Ellsworth from a distance. The man was average height, just running to fat around the middle, with thinning dark hair and a mustache he clearly spent time grooming. He dressed well, spoke with authority, and had a laugh that carried across the room. To most observers, he probably seemed like a successful, confident businessman. But Quinlan noticed other things. The way Ellsworth's expression would darken if the cards didn't fall his way. How his voice took on a nasty edge when he'd had too much whiskey. The way other men seemed to humor him rather than genuinely enjoy his company. On the third evening, Quinlan's patience paid off. Ellsworth left the saloon around 10, stumbling slightly as he made his way to his horse. Quinlan followed at a discreet distance, watching as the man rode up the hill toward that white house. Lights burned in the windows, suggesting someone was waiting up for him. The scream came about 20 minutes later, faint but unmistakable, carried on the night wind. Quinlan was moving before he'd fully processed the sound, running up the hill with his heart pounding. He slowed as he approached the house, moving into the shadows of the trees that bordered the property. Through a lit window on the side of the house, he could see into what appeared to be a parlor. Ellsworth stood in the center of the room, gesticulating wildly at someone Quinlan couldn't see. His face was red, mouth moving in what were clearly shouted words. Then he lunged forward, out of Quinlan's line of sight, and there was a crash. Quinlan was at the door before he made the conscious decision to intervene. He pounded on it hard enough to rattle the frame. "Hello? Anyone home? I need assistance." The sounds from inside ceased abruptly. Footsteps approached, and the door swung open to reveal Bernard Ellsworth, his face flushed from drink and anger. "What the hell do you want?" "Sorry to bother you, sir. My horse threw a shoe on the road nearby. Saw your lights and hoped you might know where I could find a farrier at this hour." Ellsworth squinted at him suspiciously. "There's a livery in town. They can help you in the morning." "Much obliged. Sorry for the disturbance." Quinlan made a show of tipping his hat and peering past Ellsworth into the house. He caught a glimpse of Dalton standing near an overturned chair, her hand pressed to her mouth, before Ellsworth shifted to block his view. "Was there something else?" The threat in Ellsworth's voice was barely concealed. "No, sir. Have a good evening." The door slammed shut with unnecessary force. Quinlan stood there for a moment, warring with himself. He could knock again, could force his way in, could do any number of things that would probably get him arrested or shot or both, and wouldn't help her at all in the long run. He walked back down the hill, but not toward town. Instead, he positioned himself in a grove of trees where he had a clear view of the house. If things escalated, if he heard her scream again, laws be damned, he was going in. The house grew dark around midnight. Quinlan stayed where he was until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, stiff and tired, but relieved that no further sounds of violence had reached him. Only then did he make his way back to the Yellow Rose, where he slept fitfully for a few hours before hunger drove him back out into the world. He found her at Morrison's store again, this time with Ellsworth at her side. The man had his hand clamped around her upper arm, not hard enough to be obviously brutal, but firmly enough that Quinlan could see the way her face tightened with pain. They were looking at bolts of fabric, Ellsworth pointing at various options, while Dalton nodded silently. "That one," Ellsworth declared, indicating an expensive-looking silk in deep green. "You'll make yourself a new dress for the mayor's dinner next month, something that shows you're a woman of quality." "Yes, Bernard," she said quietly, And try to smile when we're in public. People will think I don't treat you well if you keep moping around like a whipped dog." The irony of that statement was apparently lost on him. Quinlan moved closer, pretending to examine some tools on a nearby shelf, and caught the full view of Dalton's face. A new bruise darkened her jaw, and her lower lip was split on one side. Her left arm hung at an odd angle, and he wondered if Ellsworth had twisted it or merely gripped it hard enough to cause damage. "Mr. Ellsworth," Morrison said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the tension. "Will that be all for you today?" "Yes. Put it on my account." "Of course. Of course." As Morrison began cutting the fabric, Ellsworth's attention drifted to the various goods on display. His grip on Dalton's arm loosened, and she took the opportunity to step slightly away. Her gaze drifted around the store and landed on Quinlan. For just a moment, their eyes met, and he saw such depths of misery there that it made his chest ache. Then her expression shifted, became carefully neutral, and she looked away. But Quinlan had seen enough. Whatever reservations he'd had about interfering in another man's marriage evaporated. This wasn't a marriage. This was captivity. Ellsworth and Dalton left with their package. Quinlan waited a few minutes before approaching Morrison at the counter. "That woman needs help." Morrison sighed heavily. "I know. Then why doesn't anyone do anything?" "Like what?" The shopkeeper's voice held frustration and resignation in equal measure. "Sheriff won't get involved in domestic matters. Even if he did, she'd have to be willing to testify against her husband. And where would she go afterward? She's got no family here, no money of her own. Ellsworth controls everything. There has to be something. Look, son, I admire your conscience. I really do. But this is how things are. Women marry, and then they're subject to their husbands. For better or worse, that's the vow. Some men are better, some are worse. We all do what we can to live with the hands we're dealt." "That's a coward's answer." Morrison's face hardened. "Maybe so, but I've got a wife and 3 children depending on this store. Ellsworth's a good customer, and he's got friends in this town. I start making trouble, I could lose everything. Can you honestly tell me you'd risk your family's livelihood for a woman you don't even know?" Quinlan couldn't answer that because he didn't have a family to risk, but Morrison did. And for all his frustration, Quinlan couldn't entirely blame the man for his caution. What if she wanted to leave? If she had somewhere to go, someone to help her? Then I'd say God bless her and good luck. But wanting to leave and being able to leave are two very different things. Quinlan left the store with more questions than answers. He spent the afternoon asking subtle questions around town, piecing together a fuller picture of Dalton Ellsworth's life. She'd arrived in Pendleton as Dalton Emerson, a woman from Philadelphia whose family had fallen on hard times after her father's business failed. Bernard Ellsworth had been visiting Philadelphia on business, met her at some social function, and courted her rapidly. They'd married within 2 months and traveled west to claim his inheritance. By all accounts, the first month had been peaceful. Then the neighbors started noticing things, raised voices from the house, Dalton appearing in town with various injuries, always with explanations that grew increasingly implausible. A fall down the stairs, a kicked horse, a door that closed on her hand. No one had intervened, no one had offered help. And now, 4 months in, it seemed everyone had simply accepted the situation as unfortunate but unchangeable. Well, Quinlan thought grimly, they hadn't met him yet. He found her again the next morning, this time at the church. She was inside, sitting in a back pew with her head bowed. For a moment, Quinlan thought she was praying, but as he moved closer, he realized she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, while her shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. He sat down in the pew behind her, not speaking, just making his presence known. She stiffened, awareness of his presence cutting through her grief. She wiped hastily at her face with a handkerchief, trying to compose herself. "He's going to kill me," she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear. "Eventually, he's going to go too far, and I'm going to die in that house. Not if I can help it." She turned to look at him, and the hopelessness in her eyes broke something in him. "You can't help. No one can. I'm his wife. The law's on his side. Even if I left, even if I somehow got away, he would find me. He's told me so. He's told me exactly what he would do if I ever tried to leave. What if you had protection? From who? You? You're one man. Bernard has friends, has influence. And you're just passing through. Even if you helped me escape, you'd move on eventually. And then, where would I be? alone and vulnerable and waiting for him to find me. She was right, and they both knew it. One man, even a determined one, couldn't change the fundamental realities of her situation. But that didn't mean he couldn't try. "Tell me why you married him," Quinlan said softly. Dalton looked away, her gaze fixing on the simple wooden cross at the front of the church. "My father died in debt. My mother and I had nothing. I had to work as a seamstress to keep us fed. But it wasn't enough. When Bernard came along, he seemed kind at first, attentive. He promised to take care of me, to send money to support my mother. I thought I was lucky." "When did it start?" "The first night we arrived in Pendleton. He'd been drinking to celebrate claiming his inheritance. I said something he didn't like. I don't even remember what. He slapped me, told me I needed to learn my place. I was so shocked. I thought maybe it was just the alcohol, that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. It kept happening. And every time, he'd apologize afterward, say he didn't mean it, promise to do better. For a while, I believed him. And now? Now I know what he is. And I know I'm trapped." Quinlan leaned forward, resting his arms on the back of her pew. "You're not trapped. You just think you are because he's convinced you of it. That's what men like him do. They break you down until you can't imagine any other life. It's not about imagination. It's about reality. I have no money. I have no skills that would support me. I have nowhere to go. My mother is back in Philadelphia, and even if I could reach her, Bernard knows where she is. He'd use her to force me back. What if you had money? What if you had a place to go that he couldn't reach?" She looked at him as if he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly. "And where would that be? Another planet?" "California, maybe, or Canada, somewhere far enough away that he couldn't easily follow." "You're talking fantasy? Even if I had the means to travel that far, he would find me. He would never let me go. His pride wouldn't allow it. His pride might not have a choice." Something in his tone made her turn fully to face him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe Bernard Ellsworth needs to learn that actions have consequences, that there are some men who won't stand by while he terrorizes a woman. You'd be killed or arrested. Maybe, maybe not. I won't be responsible for your death or imprisonment. Then let me be responsible for my own choices. You focus on being ready to leave when the opportunity comes." She shook her head frantically. No, I won't let you do this. It's madness. You don't even know me. Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Quinlan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My father used to beat my mother. Did it for years. She made excuses, tried to hide it, told herself it would get better. One night when I was 12, I watched him break her arm. She still didn't leave. 2 weeks later, he went after her with a knife. My mother fought back, and in the struggle, he fell and cracked his head on the hearth. He died right there in our cabin." Dalton's eyes widened. "What happened to your mother?" "Sheriff called it self-defense eventually, but she spent 3 months in jail while they investigated, lost our home. We ended up moving to another town, starting over with nothing. She cleaned houses, took in laundry, whatever work she could find. I was too young to be much help, but I swore when I was old enough I'd never let another man get away with what my father did. So that's why I'm offering, because I made that promise, and I intend to keep it." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I don't want to be saved if it means someone else suffers." "Sometimes suffering is the price of doing what's right." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling around them. Finally, Dalton spoke again, her voice stronger than before. If I were to consider this, what would you suggest? First, we'd need money for travel. Do you have access to any funds at all?" "Bernard gives me a small household allowance. I've been saving what I can, hiding coins here and there. It's not much, maybe $30. "Better than nothing. Can you get access to his cash box?" She looked shocked. "You want me to steal from him?" "I want you to take what you're owed. Do you think he hasn't cost you more than whatever money he's got locked away?" She worried her lower lip, wincing when she touched the split. "He keeps it in his study. I'm not allowed in there when he's home. But during the day when he's out checking on his property, I could probably get in. Don't take too much, just enough to fund your escape plus a little extra. We don't want him to notice and get suspicious before you're ready to leave." "When would I leave?" "Give me a week to make arrangements. I need to find someone trustworthy to help get you out of town, somewhere you can stay safely while we figure out the next steps." "A week." She said it like a lifetime, which in her situation, it probably felt like. I can survive another week. The determination in her voice gave him hope. Whatever Ellsworth had done to her, he hadn't completely broken her spirit. That was good. She'd need that strength for what was coming. Over the next few days, Quinlan made his preparations with the same careful attention he'd give to planning a cattle drive through hostile territory. He made inquiries about the stage lines, the train schedules, the best routes out of Pendleton that didn't require passing through towns where Ellsworth might have connections. He also made a point of being visible around town, establishing himself as a ranch hand looking for work, someone with no particular interest in local affairs. He saw Dalton twice more during that week, both times in public places with Ellsworth present. She gave no sign of their conspiracy, playing the dutiful wife with practiced ease that made Quinlan's stomach turn. How many times had she hidden her true feelings, smiled through the pain, pretended everything was fine? On the 5th day, he received a message through Morrison, a simple note tucked into his purchase that read, Saturday. He's going to the stock auction in Hermiston, won't return until evening. Saturday was 2 days away. Quinlan used the time to finalize everything. He bought a second horse, a gentle mare that would be easy for someone unused to long rides. He packed supplies, enough for a week's journey. He also sent a telegram to an old friend in Portland, a man who'd once saved his life, and who Quinlan knew that could be trusted. The reply came back quickly. Send her my way. I'll keep her safe. Saturday morning dawned clear and hot. Quinlan was up before sunrise, checking and rechecking his preparations. The plan was simple. Dalton would take what money she could from Ellsworth's cash box, pack a small bag with essentials, and meet Quinlan at an abandoned line shack about 2 miles outside of town. From there, they'd ride hard for LeGrand, catch the train west, and get her to Portland before Ellsworth even knew she was gone. Simple in theory. But Quinlan had been around long enough to know that simple plans had a way of getting complicated. He was at the line shack by 9, the horses saddled and ready. The structure was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, long since abandoned when the ranch that owned it had moved its operations. But it provided cover from the road and a good vantage point to watch for anyone approaching. 10 o'clock came and went, then 11. Quinlan forced himself to stay calm, to trust that Dalton had good reasons if she was delayed. Maybe Ellsworth had been slow to leave. Maybe she'd had trouble accessing the cash box. At 11:30, he saw a figure in the distance, moving on foot across the scrubby grassland. As it got closer, he recognized Dalton's blue dress, now dusty and stained. She was limping badly, carrying a small carpet bag in one hand. He ran to meet her, alarm spiking when he saw her face up close. Fresh bruises mottled her cheek, and blood dripped from her nose. What happened? He came back. She gasped for air, clearly having pushed herself to the limit. He forgot some papers, came back, found me in his study with the cash box open. Jesus, how did you get away? I threw the cash box at him. It bought me enough time to run. I went out the back, through the garden. I don't think he followed me, but I don't know. I was so scared I just ran. Quinlan helped her to the shade of the shack, where she collapsed against the wall. He fetched water from his canteen, making her drink slowly despite her obvious thirst. Did you get any money? She nodded, pulling a handful of crumpled bills and coins from her pocket. Not as much as I'd hoped, maybe $50. Bernard keeps most of his wealth in the bank. It'll have to do. Can you ride? I'll have to, won't I? He appreciated her grit, even as he worried about her ability to make the journey in her current state. We need to move now. If Ellsworth figures out where you've gone, he'll come after you. I know. He helped her mount the mare, making sure she was secure before swinging onto Copper. They set out at a steady pace, not so fast as to exhaust the horses, but quick enough to put distance between them and Pendleton. Quinlan kept watch on their back trail, looking for any sign of pursuit. They'd been riding for about an hour when he spotted the dust cloud. 2 riders, maybe 3, moving fast from the direction of town. His jaw clenched. We've got company. Dalton twisted in the saddle to look, her face going white. It's him. It has to be. Can you handle a faster pace? I'll manage. They urged the horses into a gallop, racing across the high desert landscape. The terrain was mostly flat here, offering little in the way of cover or defensible positions. Their only hope was to maintain their lead and pray the horses held out. But Ellsworth and his companions had fresher mounts, and the gap began to close. Quinlan could make out details now. 3 riders, Ellsworth in the lead, on a big black gelding, 2 men he recognized from the saloon flanking him. They were armed, and from the grim set of their faces, they meant business. "Keep going!" Quinlan shouted to Dalton. "Don't stop, no matter what happens. What are you going to do? Buy you time." He reined Copper to a halt, pulling his Winchester from its scabbard. The mare continued forward with Dalton, who looked back in panic but didn't stop. Ellsworth and his men slowed as they approached, fanning out in a semicircle. Ellsworth's face was purple with rage, a nasty cut across his forehead from where the cash box had hit him. "That's my wife," he roared. "You've got no right to take her." "I didn't take her," Quinlan called back. "She left. There's a difference. She's my property. The law gives me the right to retrieve my own property. She's a person, not a cow. And from what I've seen, you've been treating her worse than you'd treat livestock. What happens between a man and his wife is no concern of yours, cowboy. Now step aside, or we'll move you aside." The 2 men with Ellsworth shifted, hands moving toward their guns. Quinlan kept his rifle steady, aimed at Ellsworth's chest. "You really want to die over this? Because that's what'll happen if you push this. I'll put a bullet in you before your friends can clear leather. Then you'll hang for murder. Maybe. But you'll still be dead. Is your pride worth that?" Ellsworth's horse danced sideways, agitated by the tension. For a moment, Quinlan thought the man might back down. Then Ellsworth's hand dropped to his gun, and everything happened at once. Quinlan fired, deliberately aiming wide, the bullet kicking up dirt in front of Ellsworth's horse. The animal reared, throwing Ellsworth off balance. One of the other men drew, and Quinlan had no choice but to shift his aim. His second shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The third man, wiser or more cowardly, threw up his hands. "I'm out! I didn't sign up for a shooting war." Ellsworth had regained control of his horse, his face now not just angry, but murderous. "You shot my man!" "He drew on me. That's self-defense, and you know it. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride back to Pendleton. Your wife is leaving you. She's going somewhere you can't find her, and you're going to let her go." "Like hell I will." "The alternative is I kill you right here. Is that what you want? To die in the dirt for a woman who hates you?" The wounded man was moaning, clutching his shoulder. The third man had already started turning his horse back toward town. Ellsworth sat there, trembling with fury, clearly torn between his rage and his sense of self-preservation. "She's nothing without me," he spat finally. "She'll come crawling back within a month, begging me to take her back. You'll see." "I doubt that. But if it makes you feel better to think so, you go right ahead." Ellsworth glared at him for a long moment, then wheeled his horse around. "Help me get Wade back to town," he snapped at the third man. Together, they managed to get the wounded man onto his horse, though he swayed dangerously in the saddle. As they started back toward Pendleton, Ellsworth turned back one more time. "This isn't over, cowboy. I'll find her. And when I do, you'll wish you'd never interfered. I'll be sure to lose sleep over that." He waited until they were well out of rifle range before allowing himself to breathe normally again. His hands were shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. That could have gone much worse. If the other men had been more committed to the fight, or if Ellsworth had been a better shot, this whole rescue could have ended in bloodshed. He kicked Copper into a gallop, following the trail Dalton had left. He found her about 2 miles ahead, stopped beside a rocky outcrop, her face streaked with tears. When she saw him approaching, she nearly fell from the saddle in her relief. "I heard shots. I thought he'd killed you." "Takes more than Bernard Ellsworth to put me down." Quinlan dismounted, reaching up to help her down. She practically fell into his arms, her whole body shaking. "It's all right. He's gone. We've got time now." "Did you kill anyone?" "Wounded one of his friends, but they're all alive, and more importantly, they're all headed back to Pendleton." She clung to him for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Quinlan found himself acutely aware of her closeness, the scent of her hair, the way she fit against him. Then she pulled back, composing herself with visible effort. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. Don't need repayment, just need you to be safe and free. That'll be payment enough." They remounted and continued their journey, this time at a more sustainable pace. The crisis had passed, at least for now, though Quinlan knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. Ellsworth might have retreated, but that didn't mean he'd given up. Men like him didn't handle humiliation well. and having his wife escape with the help of another man would eat at him like acid. They reached La Grande as the sun was setting, exhausted and dust-covered. Quinlan got them rooms at a small boarding house, careful to take separate rooms to preserve Dalton's reputation. The last thing she needed was more scandal attached to her name. Over dinner at a quiet restaurant, they talked properly for the first time, not as rescuer and victim, but as two people getting to know each other. Quinlan learned that Dalton, whose first name was Diana, had been an avid reader before her marriage, that she loved music and had played piano beautifully until Bernard had forbidden it, saying it was a waste of time. She'd wanted to be a teacher, but her father's financial troubles had ended that dream. In turn, Quinlan told her about his life on the range, the places he'd been, the work he'd done. He told her about his mother, who had eventually remarried a kind man and now lived in the peace in Colorado. He told her about the beauty of watching a sunrise from horseback, the satisfaction of honest work, the freedom of the open country. "What will you do now?" Diana asked as they finished their meal. "After you get me to Portland, I mean. You said you had a job offer in Walla Walla. That fell through once I decided to stay in Pendleton and keep an eye on you, but there's always work for a man who knows cattle and horses. I'll find something." "You gave up a job for me?" "Wasn't much of a job anyway. Would have been boring." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her face, and Quinlan felt something shift in his chest. Over the past week, he'd been so focused on the practical aspects of helping her escape that he hadn't let himself acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious. He was attracted to Diana Ellsworth, not just to her physical beauty, though she was certainly pretty even with the bruises, but to her courage, her determination, the spark of spirit that Bernard had tried and failed to extinguish. Dangerous thoughts, he reminded himself. She'd just escaped one man. The last thing she needed was another one complicating her life. They caught the westbound train the next morning, a lurching, rattling affair that nonetheless felt like luxury after the hard ride from Pendleton. Diana sat by the window, watching the landscape roll by with an expression of wonder mixed with apprehension. "Having second thoughts?" Quinlan asked quietly. "No, maybe. I don't know." She twisted her hands in her lap. "It's just, for months I dreamed of escaping, of being free. Now that it's happening, I keep waiting for something to go wrong. For Bernard to appear, for the sheriff to arrest me, for something. Nothing's going to go wrong. You're safe now." "Am I? What if Bernard follows through on his threats? What if he finds my mother, uses her to draw me out?" "Your mother's in Philadelphia. That's 3,000 miles away. Ellsworth might be angry, but I doubt he's angry enough to travel across the country on the slim chance of tracking you down. You don't know him. You don't know how obsessive he can be. Maybe not, but I know he's a coward at heart. Men who beat their wives always are. They only feel powerful when they're facing someone weaker. When confronted by an equal, they fold." Diana was quiet for a while, processing that. "You really think I'm free of him?" "I think you're on your way to being free. But freedom's not just about physical distance. It's about healing, about learning to trust yourself again, about building a new life. That part's going to take time. Time I finally have." She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why are you really doing this, Quinlan? And don't give me that story about your father again. That explains why you'd intervene, but not why you'd go to such lengths. You've spent money, given up work, put yourself at risk, for someone you barely know." He considered his answer carefully. "When I saw you that first day in Morrison's store, you reminded me of a wild bird with a broken wing. Beautiful, but hurt. Trapped, but still fighting to survive. I guess I wanted to see what would happen if that bird got free, got a chance to heal and fly. Seemed like something worth fighting for. I'm not a bird. No, you're a woman who deserves better than what you got. And if I can help you find that better life, well, that seems like a pretty good use of my time." She smiled again, this time with tears in her eyes. "You're a good man, Quinlan Garrett, better than I probably deserve. Don't talk like that. You deserve kindness. You deserve safety. You deserve a chance to be happy. Never let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." They arrived in Portland late that evening. The city was a dramatic change from the open spaces of eastern Oregon, all bustling streets and tall buildings and crowds of people. Quinlan navigated them through the chaos to a modest house on the outskirts of town, where his friend Marcus lived. Marcus was a former ranch hand turned carpenter, a solid man in his 40s with laugh lines around his eyes and hands scarred from years of labor. He welcomed them warmly, asking no questions beyond what was necessary, and showed Diana to a small but clean room where she could stay. "She'll be safe here," Marcus assured Quinlan over coffee in the kitchen, while Diana rested upstairs. "My wife and I, we keep to ourselves mostly. Neighbors aren't the nosy type. She can stay as long as she needs while she figures out her next move." "I'm grateful, Marcus. I owe you for this. You saved my life in that stampede back in Montana. Far as I'm concerned, we're even." Marcus studied him carefully. "What about you? You planning to stick around?" "For a while. Want to make sure she's really settled before I move on." "Uh-huh. And it wouldn't have anything to do with the way you look at her like she's the sunrise after a long night?" "I don't look at her any particular way." "Sure you don't. Word of advice from a married man. If you've got feelings for that woman, don't hide them out of some misguided sense of propriety. She's been through hell. What she needs now is to know that good men exist, men who can care for her without hurting her. She's not ready for that. She just escaped her husband. Then be patient, but don't be so patient you miss your chance." Quinlan spent that night in Marcus's barn, unwilling to impose further on his friend's hospitality. He lay awake in the hayloft, listening to the sounds of the city, so different from the open range he was used to. His thoughts kept circling back to Diana, wondering if she was sleeping, if she felt safe, if she was regretting any of this. In the morning, he found her in Marcus's garden, helping his wife Mary tend to the vegetables. She looked different in the soft morning light, less haunted, though the bruises still marked her skin. When she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made his heart do something complicated. "Good morning," she called. "Mary was just teaching me about growing tomatoes. Did you know they need quite a lot of water? Can't say I've spent much time on gardening." Mary, a round, cheerful woman with graying hair, laughed. "Cowboys. They know all about growing cattle, but nothing about growing food. Come on, both of you. I've got breakfast ready." Over a hearty meal of eggs and bread and jam, they discussed Diana's options. She could stay with Marcus and Mary temporarily, but she'd need work eventually, a way to support herself. Her skills were limited. She could sew, she could read and write well. She had some experience with bookkeeping from helping her father before his business failed. "There's a dressmaker on 4th Street who was looking for help," Mary offered. "I could introduce you if you'd like." "That would be wonderful. I need to start building a new life, and that means earning my own way." Quinlan admired her determination, even as part of him wanted to offer to take care of everything for her. But he knew that wouldn't be right. She'd spent months being controlled, being told what to do. She needed to find her own path now. He stayed in Portland for 2 weeks, ostensibly to make sure Diana was settled, but really because he couldn't quite bring himself to leave. He found work at a livery stable, mucking stalls and exercising horses, enough to pay his way and keep busy. In the evenings, he'd visit Marcus's house, where Diana would tell him about her day at the dressmaker's shop, the customers she'd met, the skills she was learning. She was blossoming. There was no other word for it. As the bruises faded and she grew more confident in her safety, her whole demeanor changed. She smiled more, laughed at Mary's jokes, talked about her plans for the future. She spoke of maybe saving enough money to bring her mother west, or of going to California, where she'd heard there were opportunities for women in business. Quinlan fell a little more in love with her each day, though he tried his best to hide it. She'd been clear that she needed time to heal, to figure out who she was outside of being Bernard Ellsworth's wife. The last thing he wanted to do was pressure her or make her feel obligated to him because he'd helped her escape. But on his last evening in Portland, as they walked together along the Willamette River, watching the sunset paint the water gold and pink, Diana stopped and turned to him with an intensity that stole his breath. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to listen without interrupting." "All right." "When you helped me escape Bernard, I told myself I was grateful, nothing more, that you were a kind stranger doing a good deed. But these past 2 weeks, getting to know you, seeing how you treat people with respect and gentleness, I've realized something." She took a deep breath. "I have feelings for you, Quinlan, real feelings. And I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear, given everything I've been through, but I needed to tell you before you leave tomorrow, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to speak up." Quinlan's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. Diana, I know I'm probably broken. I know I come with complications and a past that might catch up with me. I know you probably see me as someone to protect, not someone to care about romantically. But I had to tell you anyway, because you taught me that staying silent about important things only leads to regret. Are you done? She nodded, looking vulnerable and brave, and so beautiful it hurt. Good, because I've been in love with you since about the second day I met you. I've been keeping it to myself because I didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated. But if you're telling me you feel the same way, then we need to have a serious conversation about our future. Her eyes widened. You love me? Is that so surprising? Yes, no. I hoped, but I wasn't sure. She laughed, a sound of pure joy. Oh, God, we're both idiots. Probably. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, careful of the fading bruises. Diana, I don't think you're broken. I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. And I don't see you as someone to protect. I see you as someone I want to build a life with, if you'll have me. But where would we go? What would we do? That's for us to figure out together. I've got some money saved. You're working now. We could stay here in Portland, or we could go somewhere else. Montana, maybe. Or Northern California. Somewhere we could buy a small ranch, build something of our own. I don't know anything about ranching. I know enough for both of us, and you're smart. You'd learn. He smiled. Besides, you already know about growing tomatoes. She laughed again, tears streaming down her face now, but happy tears this time. Are you asking me to marry you? Eventually, yes, but not right now. Right now, I'm asking if you'll let me court you properly. Let me take you to dinner, walk with you, get to know you without all the fear and running. And when you're ready, when you're healed and sure, then I'll ask you properly. Is that acceptable? More than acceptable. She threw her arms around him, and Quinlan held her close, marveling at how something that had started as a simple act of conscience had become the most important thing in his life. They kissed there by the river, gentle and sweet, a promise of things to come. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Quinlan felt like he'd found something worth staying for. The next months passed in a blur of courtship and planning. Quinlan stayed in Portland, taking steady work at a nearby ranch, while Diana continued at the dressmaker's shop. They spent their free time together, exploring the city, talking for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Diana's bruises healed, though sometimes she'd wake from nightmares about Bernard. Quinlan would hold her through them, patient and steady until the fear passed. Slowly, she learned to trust that his gentleness wasn't a trap, that his kindness wasn't something she'd have to pay for later. There was no word from Pendleton, no sign that Bernard had followed through on his threats to find her. As weeks turned to months, Diana began to truly believe she was free. 8 months after they had met in Morrison's general store, Quinlan took Diana on a picnic to a beautiful spot overlooking the Columbia River. The spring weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with wildflowers blooming across the hillsides. After they'd eaten, he took her hand and dropped to one knee. Diana Emerson, I fell in love with you the moment I saw you trying to hide your pain and still maintain your dignity. These past months getting to know you have been the happiest of my life. You make me want to be better, to do more, to build something lasting and good. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to hide bruises or fear or sadness again? She was crying again, but her smile was radiant. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he'd commissioned from a local jeweler, nothing fancy but made with care. They kissed as the sun sparkled on the river below, the future stretching out before them, bright with possibility. They married a month later in a small ceremony at Marcus and Mary's house, with a handful of friends as witnesses. Diana wore a dress she'd made herself, pale yellow like sunshine, and carried wildflowers. Quinlan wore his best shirt and pants, polished his boots until they shone, and tried not to show how nervous he was. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinlan kissed Diana with all the tenderness he possessed, and felt her kiss him back with equal emotion. This was a real marriage, built on choice and love and mutual respect. Everything Bernard Ellsworth had never been capable of giving her. They honeymooned at a small cabin in the mountains east of Portland, a place Marcus knew about, where they could have privacy and peace. For a week, they existed in their own world, learning each other's bodies with the same care they had learned each other's hearts. Diana had been afraid at first, the memories of Bernard's brutality making her tense. But Quinlan was patient. He showed her that intimacy could be gentle, that pleasure could be shared, that her body was her own to give freely rather than something to be taken. When they returned to Portland, it was to good news. Quinlan had been offered a position as foreman on a ranch in eastern Oregon, near the town of Enterprise. It was a good job with decent pay, and it came with a small house on the property. Better yet, Enterprise was far enough from Pendleton that they'd likely never run into anyone who knew about Diana's past. They packed their few belongings and made the journey east, Diana riding beside Quinlan on the mare they had kept from their escape. The landscape changed as they traveled, becoming more rugged and beautiful, with mountains rising in the distance. When they finally reached the ranch, Diana fell in love with it immediately. The house was modest but sturdy, 2 rooms plus a kitchen, with a small front porch and a view of the mountains. It needed work, but Diana threw herself into making it a home with the same determination she had applied to rebuilding her life. She sewed curtains, planted a garden, befriended the other ranch families. Quinlan worked long days managing the ranch's cattle operation, but he always came home to Diana's smile, to a warm meal and conversation, and the simple joy of knowing she was safe and happy. At night, they'd sit on the porch and watch the stars, talking about their plans for the future. A year after their wedding, Diana told him she was pregnant. Quinlan swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "Are you happy?" she asked, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Are you scared?" "A little, but mostly excited. This baby will be born into love, Quinlan. That's more than I had, more than you had. That's everything." Their son was born in the spring of 1885, a healthy boy with Diana's auburn hair and Quinlan's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Quinlan's grandfather. Holding his son for the first time, Quinlan made a silent vow that this child would never know violence or fear in his home, that he would grow up understanding that strength came from gentleness, that being a man meant protecting those weaker, not exploiting them. Diana was a wonderful mother, patient and loving, and watching her with Thomas made Quinlan fall in love with her all over again. She sang to their son, read him stories, taught him his letters before he could barely talk. The shadows that had haunted her eyes when they first met were gone, replaced by contentment and joy. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Caroline, dark-haired like Quinlan, but with Diana's warm smile. Their little house felt full to bursting with life and love. Quinlan was promoted to manager of the ranch, a position that came with a larger house and better pay. They moved into it gratefully, Diana already planning how to decorate the extra rooms. Life wasn't perfect. There were hard winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened the cattle, moments of worry and stress. But through it all, they had each other. Diana never hid behind long sleeves anymore. She wore her scars, both visible and invisible, as testament to what she'd survived and overcome. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching Thomas chase Caroline through the yard, Diana leaned her head on Quinlan's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped at Morrison's store that day?" she asked. "Sometimes, but not often. I try not to dwell on what ifs. I think about it. I think about how close I came to dying in that house in Pendleton, how I'd given up hope of ever escaping. And then you appeared, like something out of a story, my cowboy in dusty boots, who saw what no one else wanted to see and decided to do something about it. You saved yourself, Diana. I just provided transportation. No, you provided hope. You showed me that good men existed, that I deserved better. Without that, I never would have had the courage to leave." She lifted her head to look at him. "You gave me my life back, Quinlan. You gave me this." She gestured at the house, the children, the mountains rising in the distance. "All of this. How do I ever thank you for that? You already have. Every day we spend together, every smile, every moment of happiness, that's thanks enough." He kissed her softly. "Besides, I'm the one who should be grateful. You took a chance on a drifter cowboy with nothing but good intentions and a borrowed horse. Not many women would do that. I knew what I saw in you from the start. Honor, kindness, strength that didn't need to prove itself through violence. All the things I'd thought didn't exist in men. They exist, they're just sometimes hard to find. Thomas ran up to the porch, breathless and laughing. Papa, can we go riding tomorrow, please? If your mama says it's all right. Mama? Thomas turned pleading eyes to Diana. We'll see, if you finish your lessons and help your sister clean up the toys you left scattered everywhere. Thomas groaned but agreed, running back to gather Caroline and begin the promised cleanup. Diana smiled, watching them. They're good children, she said softly. They have a good mother, and a good father, better than I ever imagined I could give them. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's way with horses and his mother's quick mind. Caroline was artistic, always drawing or creating something, her room filled with sketches and half-finished projects. They added a third child, another boy named James, who had a gift for numbers and insisted on helping Diana keep the household accounts from the time he was 8. The ranch prospered under Quinlan's management, becoming one of the most successful in the region. He earned a reputation as a fair but firm boss, someone who treated his workers well and expected excellence in return. Diana became known in the community for her charitable work, helping other women who found themselves in difficult situations, offering them the same kind of practical support and hope that Quinlan had once offered her. They never forgot where they'd come from. Every year on the anniversary of Diana's escape from Pendleton, they made a quiet toast to second chances and new beginnings. They spoke openly with their children about Diana's first marriage, age-appropriate honesty about the fact that not all people were kind, that sometimes strength meant walking away, that asking for help wasn't weakness. News reached them occasionally from Pendleton. Through mutual acquaintances and letters, they learned that Bernard Ellsworth had remarried 2 years after Diana's escape, a younger woman who lasted less than a year before her family intervened and removed her from the marriage. After that, Ellsworth's fortunes had declined. Drinking and poor business decisions cost him most of his inheritance. He died in 1894 of liver failure, alone and largely unmourned. When Diana learned of his death, she felt no satisfaction, only a kind of sad relief that he could never hurt anyone else. She said a prayer for the man he might have been if he had been capable of kindness, and then she let him go from her thoughts forever. Quinlan watched his wife grieve for what could have been, while celebrating what was, and loved her even more for the grace she showed. She'd never let bitterness poison her, never let her past define her future. She'd chosen joy, chosen love, chosen to build rather than destroy. Thomas married a local girl when he was 22, bringing her home to the ranch where Quinlan taught him the business from the ground up. Caroline went to Portland to study art, then returned to Enterprise and opened a small studio that attracted students from across the region. James surprised them all by becoming a banker, putting his mathematical mind to work, helping local ranchers and farmers secure loans and manage their finances. On their 25th anniversary, Diana and Quinlan took a trip back to Portland, staying with Marcus and Mary, who'd become like family over the years. The city had grown enormously, barely recognizable from the place they had fled to all those years ago. They visited the dressmaker's shop where Diana had worked, now run by a younger woman who'd learned the trade from the original owner. They walked along the Willamette River, retracing their steps from that evening when they'd first admitted their feelings. "Do you have any regrets?" Quinlan asked as they watched the sunset, the same question they'd asked each other many times over the years. "Only one," Diana said. "I regret not finding you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had. We have now, we have the future. That's enough. More than enough." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in the familiar, comfortable way of long partnership. "I love you, Quinlan Garrett, more than I could ever express in words. I love you too, Diana, more than life itself." They returned to Enterprise, to their children and grandchildren, a growing brood as Thomas and his wife added to the family. The house Quinlan had built over the years, expanding the original structure, echoed with the sounds of young voices. Diana kept a photograph album, carefully documenting every important moment. First steps, first days of school, holidays, and celebrations. Her favorite photograph was one taken on their 20th anniversary. The whole family was gathered on the porch, 3 generations smiling at the camera. Diana stood in the center, Quinlan's arms wrapped around her from behind, their children and grandchildren surrounding them. She was wearing a short-sleeved dress, something she never would have dared during those dark months in Pendleton. Her arms were visible, unmarked except by the passage of time and the honest work of building a life. No more hiding, no more fear, just love and family and the freedom to be herself. As they grew older, Quinlan and Diana found new rhythms. He eventually stepped back from managing the ranch day to day, turning it over to Thomas while remaining available for advice and consultation. Diana continued her charitable work, now focusing on helping establish a women's shelter and enterprise, a place where those fleeing dangerous situations could find temporary safety. "You would have appreciated something like this," Quinlan observed one day as he helped her organize donations for the shelter. "That's exactly why we need it. No woman should have to wait for a cowboy to ride into town and save her. She should have resources, options, a place to go that will help her save herself. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm practical. There's a difference. You're both." On their 40th anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting half of Enterprise and the surrounding ranches. The celebration lasted all day, with food and music and dancing. As the sun set and the party continued around them, Quinlan led Diana away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. 40 years, he said softly. Seems impossible. Feels like both forever and no time at all. Diana leaned against him, as comfortable in his presence as breathing. "Do you remember that first day when you saw me break the jar of peaches? I remember thinking you looked like you were about to bolt, like a wild thing caught in a trap. I was trapped in every way that mattered, and you set me free. We set each other free. You taught me what it meant to truly love someone, to build a partnership based on respect and trust. Before you, I was just drifting, existing, but not really living. And now I've lived more fully than I ever imagined possible. All because I happened to walk into a general store on a hot August day and saw a woman who needed help. Fate, Diana said simply. It had to be. Two broken people finding each other and becoming whole. You were never broken. Hurt, yes. Trapped, yes, but never broken. I felt broken, until you showed me I wasn't." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From the house behind them came the sounds of celebration, their legacy of love made manifest in children and grandchildren, in the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination. Quinlan thought back to that young cowboy he'd been, 30 years old and rootless, passing through Pendleton with no particular destination in mind. If someone had told him then that stopping to help a stranger would lead to this, 40 years of marriage and a family and a purpose bigger than himself, he wouldn't have believed it. It seemed too perfect, too much like a fairy tale. But here he stood, an old man now with silver in his hair and lines around his eyes, holding the woman who'd made it all possible. Not a fairy tale. Real life, with all its complications and challenges and moments of pure joy. "What are you thinking?" Diana asked, sensing his reverie. "That I'd do it all again, every moment, every choice, every risk, all of it, just to end up right here with you. Even the part where you got shot at, even that, though I'd prefer to avoid it if possible in any future lives we might live." She laughed, the sound as bright and lovely as it had been when she was 23 and just learning what it meant to be happy. "Deal. In our next life, we meet under less dramatic circumstances. Maybe you can just ask me to dance at a social. I will, and I'll fall in love with you all over again. Promises, promises." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 4 decades of love and commitment and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Diana rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for caring when no one else did, for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. You were always lovable, Diana, always worthy. I just had the privilege of being the one to show you." They walked back to the party hand in hand, ready to rejoin the celebration of the life they'd built together. A life born from one man's decision to intervene, one woman's courage to accept help, and the love that had grown between them like wildflowers in the harsh but beautiful landscape of eastern Oregon. Years later, when Quinlan was 73 and Diana 70, they sat together on the porch of their home as they did every evening when weather permitted. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management. Their grandchildren were growing into fine adults, and great-grandchildren were beginning to arrive, tiny new branches on the family tree. Diana's health had been declining slowly, the inevitable progression of time taking its toll. Quinlan's joints ached in cold weather, and he moved more slowly than he once had. But they were together, and that made everything bearable. "Read to me?" Diana asked, handing him a book they'd been working through together, a collection of poetry she'd ordered from a catalog. Quinlan settled his reading glasses on his nose and opened to their marked page. His voice, rough with age but still strong, filled the evening air with words of love and loss and triumph. Diana closed her eyes, smiling softly, her hand clasped in his. When he finished, she opened her eyes and looked at him with such depth of feeling that it took his breath away, even after all these years. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Whatever comes next, wherever we go from here, I'll carry you in my heart for all eternity." "Diana, I mean it. You saved my life in every way that matters, and then you made that life worth living. I couldn't have asked for more." "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly, though fear clutched at his heart. "We've got years left. We have right now, and right now is perfect." She fell asleep there on the porch, her hand still in his, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing a comfort. Quinlan watched over her as the stars emerged, as he'd done countless times before, and made the same promise he'd made 43 years ago in that abandoned line shack. "I will keep you safe. I will love you always. Whatever comes, we face it together." Diana lived another 7 years, long enough to see their youngest great-grandchild born, long enough to celebrate their 50th anniversary, surrounded by the enormous family they'd created. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77, Quinlan held her hand and whispered his goodbyes, his heart breaking even as he celebrated the incredible life they had shared. He lived another 3 years after that, cared for by his children, surrounded by love, but always missing the woman who'd been his partner and best friend for half a century. On what would have been their 53rd anniversary, Quinlan passed away quietly in his sleep, and the family buried him beside Diana in the Enterprise Cemetery, their headstones simple but elegant. Quinlan Garrett, beloved husband, father, grandfather; Diana Garrett, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, together forever. Their great-granddaughter, named Diana after her great-grandmother, would grow up hearing the story of how a cowboy had once saved a woman hiding bruises beneath her long sleeves, how he'd promised her safety and given her love, how they'd built an empire of family and kindness from the ashes of cruelty and fear. She'd tell the story to her own children, and they'd tell it to theirs, a legacy of love that transcended time. Because some stories don't end when the people in them die. They live on in the hearts and memories of those who come after, inspiring new generations to choose courage over fear, love over hate, hope over despair. The story of Quinlan and Diana Garrett became exactly that kind of tale, a reminder that one person's compassion could change everything, that love could heal the deepest wounds, that happy endings were possible even for those who'd survived the darkest moments. And in a small town in eastern Oregon, in a house built by strong hands and filled with laughter, their descendants continued the traditions they had started, treating everyone with respect, offering help to those who needed it, building lives based on love rather than fear. The ranch prospered through generations, a testament to the solid foundation Quinlan and Diana had laid. In the end, theirs was a simple story. A man noticed a woman in trouble and chose to help. A woman accepted that help and chose to trust. Together, they built something beautiful from broken pieces, proving that redemption was possible, that love could triumph, that even the darkest nights could give way to bright mornings. Their story was written in long sleeves rolled up to reveal healed skin, in promises kept, in a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was written in the faces of their children and grandchildren, in the values they passed down, in the countless small kindnesses that rippled out from that one decision Quinlan made in a general store in Pendleton, Oregon, in the summer of 1883. Some stories are meant to be told and retold, passed down through generations as lessons and inspiration. The story of the cowboy who saw what others missed, who kept his promise of safety and gave so much more, who loved a woman not in spite of her scars, but because of the strength they represented. This was one of those stories. It lived on long after the last person who knew them personally had passed, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the enduring nature of true love. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Quinlan and Diana Garrett walk together still, hand in hand, free from pain and fear, bound by the love that had saved them both and created a legacy that would never fade.